We're an organisation that's responsible for a shark control program in KwaZulu-Natal, which historically was called Natal. We've been in operation for over 40 years. Shark nets were first introduced in Durban, which is the main city in KwaZulu-Natal, in 1952. And the reason for that is because there were something like 20 shark attacks in the 1940s, a large number of which were fatal, and people were unhappy about going into the water. They felt unsafe. So as a result, shark nets were introduced into Durban, a concept that was first developed off the beaches of Sydney in Australia in the late 1930s. And the idea is that those nets actively fish for sharks. They're gill nets. They're not a physical barrier. The sharks can move over the top of the nets, around the sides of the nets, so they can come inshore, but most sharks tend to be active at night, so they come inshore at night, and obviously that's not when we swim. We tend to swim during the heat of the day. And they essentially fish down the number of sharks in that area and reduce the chances of a shark coming into contact with a human.
All right. How many sharks do you catch every year with your nets, roughly?
We catch in the region of 600 sharks. We protect 38 bathing or swimming beaches. We have had a program over the last decade or so where we've tried to reduce catches, and we've had a number of initiatives whereby we've brought the shark catch down from essentially 1,400 a year down to about 600 a year.
All right. And what species primarily do you catch?
A large number of the carcharodonid species, grey shark family, dusky shark, some of the hammerheads. We get quite a high number of what we call ragged-tooth sharks, or in the States are known as sand tiger sharks. And then we get lesser numbers of things like white sharks, bull sharks, tiger sharks, essentially about 14 common species.
All right. And what species are responsible for most of the shark attacks in South African waters?
Like most other places in the world where we find that coastal shark attacks are primarily the result of an encounter between a human and either a bull shark, a tiger shark, or a white shark. We find in KwaZulu-Natal that historically most of the incidents involved bull sharks. We have a lot of rivers coming into the sea, and we found in summer that with the flooding rivers it seems to lure the bull sharks close inshore, and historically they were responsible for most of the attacks. But we have documented incidents involving white sharks as well as tiger sharks.
All right. You mentioned in your presentation that the nets are taken down during the sardine run. What is the sardine run, and why do you take the nets down?
The sardine run is an amazing event. It occurs during the winter months, essentially June and July, where we find huge shoals of sardines coming up from the south, and they come into southern KwaZulu-Natal waters. And depending on water currents, these fish may be literally within 100 meters of the shore, and they're usually accompanied by huge numbers of predators, mainly sharks, but to a lesser extent dolphins. And if we leave the nets in place, we can catch literally hundreds of sharks in a day.
So you try to remove the nets in order to reduce the chance of that happening?
Yes, the sharks are there because there's a lot of food around. The sardines are very, very small. The sharks that we associate with the sardine run generally aren't regarded as posing a huge threat to humans. So at that time of the year, we would rather take the nets out to prevent excessive mortalities.
All right. And what happens to the sharks that you do catch? Are the ones that are still alive at the time that you catch them, what happens to them?
Yes, of the 600 sharks that we catch a year, between 10 and 15% are found alive. The boat crews go out at first light in the morning. They check the nets. If they find a live shark, even if it's a dangerous shark, they will tag and release the animal. But unfortunately, most of the sharks are already dead. Occasionally, the shark might have been left in the nets for a couple of days because bad weather has prevented the boat crews from going out and checking the nets. But most of the sharks are caught during the night, and then they're found early the next morning. They're removed from the nets. They're brought through to our offices in Mhlanga Rocks, which is just north of Durban, and we use them for research purposes, but also we use them for educational purposes. We have 7 shows a week where we have an audiovisual program accompanied by a dissection of one of those sharks that we've caught. And the shark is cut open in front of the public, and it's part of an educational message to try and educate people about sharks. A lot of black people in South Africa, for them the sea is not a natural attraction, and they don't know a lot about what happens in the sea, so we invite them to come and visit us, and they can see the shark dissection, learn about sharks, learn a little bit about the sea, and also we try and instill a conservation message whereby we try and change people's perceptions about sharks. Many people fear sharks, and often that fear is irrational, and we'd rather instill a feeling of respect for the sharks. And at the same time, when the shark is being cut open, we can collect valuable biological information such as size and sexual maturity and stomach contents, what the sharks have been feeding on.
All right. Do these nets ever catch anything other than sharks?
Yes, unfortunately, gill nets, as we generally know, are not very selective. We do catch rays, dolphins and turtles, and that's one of the reasons why we are trying to reduce the number of nets but still provide the necessary protection to swimmers and surfers.
And what techniques are you using in order to still provide this protection but reduce the number of nets?
Well, for example, to try and reduce dolphin catches, we put acoustic alarms onto the nets to warn the dolphins. These are commercially available units that are used widely in gill net fisheries throughout the world to reduce interactions between dolphins and nets. We've got low frequency whale alarms. We have a humpback whale migration up the east coast of South Africa in the winter months, and we put whale alarms in the nets during that time to try and reduce the catches of whales. We're also going across to a system which is widely used in Queensland and Australia, where at many beaches, because there are large numbers of turtles in the vicinity, may well be turtle nesting beaches, they find that nets have a very high mortality on the turtles, so they fish for sharks using large baited hooks, which are essentially anchored off a large float. Historically, they used to use big drums, so these devices are referred to as drum lines, and they're fishing alongside the nets or in place of the nets about 500 meters offshore. And we've only been using drum lines for 3 years now down in the south, and we found that the catch of things like turtles, dolphins and rays and whales is very, very low. And we're hoping that with the passage of time we will be able to expand this drumline program and replace more nets throughout the netted region. Unfortunately, because one is essentially there, the nets are there to protect human life, we cannot do anything too radical. We cannot try all sorts of different things, because essentially we're putting humans at risk as a result. So one has to adopt a very conservative approach when one wants to change what we've gotten, which has worked so well for well over 50 years in the case of Durban.